Picture a place so tranquil it almost feels frozen in time. Delphi, Indiana, a town where everyone knows everyone. But on February 13th, 2017, that tranquility was shattered. Two teenage girls, Abby Williams and Libby German, vanished while hiking along the Mountain High Bridge. This isn't just a missing persons case. It's a mystery that twists and turns with each new piece of evidence, a puzzle that took over 5 years to even begin to solve.
What makes this case so gripping is the chilling evidence Libby German managed to capture herself. She recorded a video on her phone showing a man, now known as Bridge Guy, walking toward the girls. Even more haunting is the audio. You hear a male voice saying, "Guys, down the hill."
It sends chills down your spine just thinking about it. Libby's quick thinking provided crucial evidence, but it also raises so many questions. What was going through her mind as she hit record? Did she have a feeling something was wrong?
We can only speculate. But that video and audio clip became the focal point of the investigation. This seemingly peaceful hike turned tragic when the girls' bodies were found the next day, near Deer Creek, only half a mile from the bridge.
It's a devastating discovery that really shook the community. I remember following the case back then and feeling so helpless. The authorities released those conflicting sketches of the suspect, adding to the confusion. One looked like a younger man, maybe in his 20s, while the other seemed to depict an older, heavier individual.
Those sketches created a lot of noise. It may have even sent investigators down the wrong path. You have to wonder how much the pressure of the national spotlight influenced the investigation. But even with the video, the audio, and witness accounts, the case remained cold for 5 years.
And then, out of the blue, in October 2022, they arrest Richard Allen. Here's the twist. He wasn't some outsider. Allen was a familiar face in Delphi, working as a pharmacy technician at the local CVS.
Right, he was a 50-year-old married man, seemingly ordinary. With no criminal record, his arrest sent shockwaves through the community. People who knew Allen described him as quiet, friendly, helpful, the last person anyone would suspect.
That's almost like something out of a movie. The seemingly normal guy living a double life. But the question becomes, how did they finally connect him to the crime?
Well, there were a few key things. One was an unspent .40 bullet found at the crime scene. A firearms expert linked it back to Richard Allen's gun through a detailed ballistics analysis, comparing markings on the bullet to those on test-fired rounds from his weapon.
That seems pretty damning, but I remember reading that his defense team challenged that analysis. Didn't they argue it was flawed because it compared an unspent bullet to fired rounds?
Exactly. They claimed that the comparison wasn't reliable because the markings on a bullet that hasn't been fired can differ from those on a fired bullet. It raises an interesting question about the limitations of this kind of forensic evidence.
That's a good point. But even with that challenge, Allen's alleged confessions during his incarceration really turned the case on its head. He reportedly confessed to a prison psychologist, detailing the encounter with the girls, and even mentioning being spooked by a white van.
The white van detail is especially fascinating because it seemed to corroborate existing rumors and speculations circulating in Delphi. There was talk about a white van being seen near the bridge around the time of the murders. However, an Indiana State Police officer testified that he'd never heard anything about a white van until Allen brought it up.
So, was this detail something Allen picked up from media coverage? Or was it a genuine memory? It definitely muddies the waters. And it wasn't just the psychologist. He also allegedly confessed and recorded jail phone calls with his wife, expressing fear of the electric chair.
These calls are incredibly disturbing. He reportedly said things like, "I did it, I killed Abby and Libby, and they're messing with my head." He also made statements about losing his mind.
Of course. His defense team used to argue that his confessions were the result of mental illness, brought on by solitary confinement. It's a tough situation, trying to decipher whether these confessions are genuine or the product of troubled mind under immense pressure.
The jury had a lot to grapple with during the trial. They had to weigh the evidence, including those confessions, against the defense's arguments about Allen's mental state and the potential unreliability of certain pieces of evidence, like the ballistics analysis.
And after weeks of testimony, the jury finally delivered its verdict on November 11th, 2024.
Guilty on all counts. It was a moment of intense emotion in the courtroom. The families of Abby and Libby finally had some sense of justice after all these years. But it's important to remember that this verdict doesn't erase the pain and loss they've endured.
Absolutely. The Delphi murders continue to haunt this small town. But before we delve further into the trial and its aftermath, let's go back to the beginning and explore the initial investigation in more detail. After those conflicting sketches were released, what were some of the other challenges investigators faced in those early days?
One of the biggest challenges was the sheer volume of tips and leads that poured in. Remember, this case garnered national attention, and people from all over the country were calling in with information, theories, and potential sightings. It was a massive undertaking to sift through all that data and determine what was credible and what was simply speculation. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, especially in the early days, when the internet was buzzing with theories and speculation. You had armchair detectives, true crime enthusiasts, and even psychics all weighing in, creating this chaotic information landscape that investigators had to navigate.
It makes you realize the challenges of conducting an investigation in the digital age. So much information. But how do you separate fact from fiction? Especially when public pressure is mounting. Did the investigators ever publicly acknowledge any specific hurdles they were facing?
They were tight-lipped for a long time, understandably so. They didn't want to jeopardize the investigation by revealing too much. But there were hints of frustration, particularly about the conflicting sketches. They eventually admitted that those sketches, based on different witness accounts, may have actually hindered the investigation early on.
It's fascinating how eyewitness accounts, which we often think of as reliable, can sometimes be so misleading. In this case, it seems those sketches might have sent investigators on a wild goose chase, diverting attention from the real culprit.
It's a reminder that memory is a fickle thing. Witnesses can be influenced by stress, fear, or even media coverage, and their recollections can change over time. That's why investigators rely on physical evidence and forensic analysis to corroborate or contradict eyewitness accounts.
Speaking of physical evidence, let's talk about the autopsy results. They weren't released to the public until 6 years after the murders. Why the delay?
That was a controversial decision, to say the least. Authorities argued that releasing the cause of death, which was homicide by a sharp object, could compromise the investigation. They feared that potential suspects might use that information to tailor their stories or even destroy evidence.
But holding back such crucial information for so long must have been incredibly frustrating for the families and the community. Did that decision erode public trust in the investigation?
Absolutely. People felt like they were being kept in the dark. And rumors started swirling about a possible cover-up or incompetence on the part of law enforcement. The lack of transparency created this atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. That lingered for years.
It seems like a delicate balance, protecting the integrity of the investigation while also keeping the public informed and maintaining their trust. In this case, the decision to withhold information for so long might have backfired, even if it ultimately helped lead to Alan's arrest.
It's a debate that continues to this day. Some legal experts argue that withholding evidence for such an extended period of time violates the public's right to know, while others maintain that it's a necessary tactic in complex investigations.
It's a reminder that justice is often a messy, imperfect process. But let's get back to Richard Allen. After years of dead ends, how did he suddenly become the focus of the investigation?
It wasn't sudden at all. The investigation was ongoing, and they were constantly reevaluating evidence and following up on leads. It turns out that Allen had been interviewed early on, but he wasn't considered a serious suspect at the time. It wasn't until a volunteer file clerk noticed some inconsistencies in his initial statements that investigators took a closer look.
So, a seemingly minor detail, caught by a diligent volunteer, ended up being a turning point in the case. That's remarkable.
It speaks to the importance of human observation and the fact that sometimes the smallest details can lead to the biggest breakthroughs. Investigators re-interviewed Allen, and this time, his story didn't quite add up. He made contradictory statements, and his alibi was shaky.
And that's when they started digging deeper into his background, eventually leading to the discovery of the .40 caliber bullet and the ballistics analysis that linked it back to his gun.
Precisely. It was a combination of factors, the inconsistencies in his statements, the ballistics evidence, and ultimately, his own alleged confessions that led to his arrest.
Let's talk more about those confessions. We've touched on them briefly, but I'm curious to delve into the specifics. What exactly did Allen reportedly confess to? And how did those confessions play out during the trial?
According to court documents and testimony, Allen made multiple confessions, both to a prison psychologist and in recorded jail phone calls with his wife. In his confession to the psychologist, he allegedly described encountering the girls on the bridge, his initial intention to assault them, and then being startled by a white van, which he claimed prompted him to panic and ultimately killed them.
That white van detail has always intrigued me. It seemed to add an unexpected layer to the case.
Right. It fueled speculation about whether Allen had an accomplice or whether the murders were part of a larger conspiracy. However, No evidence of a second suspect or a white van directly connected to the crime has ever been found.
Was it a genuine memory?
Yeah.
A fabrication? Or something Allen picked up from media coverage?
It's hard to say for sure. His defense team argued that his confessions, including the white van detail, were unreliable and the product of a deteriorating mental state brought on by solitary confinement. They pointed to his statements about losing his mind and hearing voices as evidence that he was not in his right state of mind when he made those confessions.
It must have been a challenging task for the jury to determine the validity of those confessions. How did the prosecution and the defense present their arguments regarding Allen's mental state?
The prosecution countered by emphasizing that Allen's confessions were detailed and consistent with the known evidence, including the location of the crime and the ballistics analysis. They brought in their own expert witnesses, including the prison psychologist who interviewed Allen, to argue that he was lucid and aware of his actions when he confessed.
It sounds like a classic battle of the experts,
Yeah,
each side presenting their own interpretation of Allen's mental state and the reliability of his confessions.
exactly. It's a reminder that even in seemingly clear-cut cases, there are often layers of complexity and ambiguity that make it difficult to arrive at a definitive truth.
And in this case, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, finding Allen guilty on all counts. But even with the verdict, the question of his motive remains somewhat murky.
That's right. The prosecution presented a theory of sexual assault as the motive, based on Allen's alleged confession about his initial intention to assault the girls. However, they lacked any physical evidence, such as DNA, to corroborate that theory.
So, while the jury found him guilty of the murders, the exact reasons behind his actions remain a subject of speculation and debate. It's a chilling reminder that even with a conviction, some cases leave us with lingering questions about the darkness that can reside within seemingly ordinary individuals. But before we wrap up our deep dive into the Delphi Murders case, there are a few more intriguing aspects we need to explore. For instance, what about the impact of this case on the field of forensic science? Did the investigation and trial bring to light any new techniques or highlight any limitations of existing methods?
That's a great question, and one that I think is particularly relevant, given the advancements we've seen in forensic technology in recent years. While the Delphi case didn't necessarily introduce groundbreaking new techniques, it did showcase the evolving role of digital evidence in criminal investigations.
Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Of course. Remember that grainy video and audio clip from Libby German's phone? That footage played a crucial role in the investigation and trial. Forensic experts were able to enhance the video, making it clearer and more detailed, which ultimately helped identify Richard Allen as Bridge Guy.
It's amazing to think how technology can breathe new life into seemingly unusable evidence. Did the defense team challenge the validity of that enhanced video?
They did, arguing that the enhancement process could have introduced distortions or inaccuracies. However, the prosecution's expert witnesses testified that the enhancement techniques used were scientifically sound, and that the resulting images were reliable representations of the original footage.
So it seems like a case where technology played a significant role in bringing justice, but also raised important questions about the reliability and interpretation of digital evidence.
Exactly. And it highlights the need for ongoing research and development in the field of forensic science to keep pace with advancements in technology and ensure that the evidence presented in court is accurate and admissible.
It's a fascinating area of exploration, and I'm sure we'll continue to see new developments in forensic technology emerge in the years to come. But for now, let's shift our focus back to the human element of this case. We've discussed the impact on the community and the families, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the role of the media in this case. It was a national news story from the very beginning, and the level of public interest was intense. How do you think that media attention influenced the investigation, the trial, and ultimately the perception of this case?
The media's role in the Delphi Murders case is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, the widespread coverage helped keep the case in the public eye, generating leads and putting pressure on law enforcement to find the killer. On the other hand, that same media scrutiny could have also influenced witness accounts, fueled speculation, and potentially even hampered the investigation at times.
It's a double-edged sword. And with the rise of social media, we've seen a surge in armchair detectives and online sleuths trying to solve cases from their living rooms. Did that play a role in the Delphi investigation?
Absolutely. The case sparked a frenzy of online discussions, theories, and even accusations, sometimes targeting innocent individuals. Based on flimsy evidence or pure conjecture, it created this digital echo chamber where misinformation and rumors spread like wildfire, making it even harder for investigators to separate fact from fiction.
It's a reminder that while public interest and citizen engagement can be valuable in solving crimes, there's also a danger of that interest spiraling into a chaotic and potentially harmful online mob mentality.
That's a valid concern. It's a delicate balance between leveraging the power of social media to gather information and maintain public awareness, while also mitigating the potential for harm and misinformation.
This deep dive into the Delphi Murders case has been a journey through a labyrinth of evidence, emotions, and unanswered questions. We've uncovered chilling details, grappled with conflicting accounts, and witnessed the impact of this tragedy on a small town and the nation as a whole. But even with Richard Allen's conviction, it feels like there are still pieces of the puzzle missing. The lack of a clear motive, the lingering doubts about the white van detail, and the years of withheld information all contribute to a sense of unease, even with the legal proceedings concluded.
I agree. And it's important to acknowledge that the families of Abby and Libby continue to grieve and seek answers. The verdict may have provided some closure, but the pain of their loss will likely endure. This case is a stark reminder that justice is often a long and winding road, filled with setbacks, complexities, and ultimately, imperfect resolutions.
It's a case that has captivated the nation, not just for its horrific nature, but for the questions it raises about human nature, the pursuit of justice, and the limits of our understanding. But even in the face of these enduring mysteries, it's crucial to remember the victims, to honor their memory, and to support the families as they navigate the long and arduous process of healing. Before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more aspect of the case I want to touch on, the sentencing phase. Now that Allen has been found guilty, what's the next step in the legal process, and what are the potential outcomes?
That's an important question. Following the guilty verdict, the case will move into the sentencing phase. A separate hearing will be held, usually within a few weeks or months, where the judge will determine Allen's punishment in Indiana. The sentencing range for murder is 45 to 65 years. However, since Allen was convicted on 2 counts of murder, it's possible that the judge could impose consecutive sentences, meaning that he would serve the sentences for each count back to back.
So, we're potentially talking about a very lengthy prison sentence. What factors will the judge consider when determining the appropriate punishment?
The judge will consider a variety of factors, including the nature and circumstances of the crimes, Allen's criminal history, or lack thereof in this case, his age and health, any mitigating or aggravating factors, and statements from the victims' families. The prosecution and defense will present their arguments for what they believe is a just sentence, and the judge will ultimately make the final decision.
Sounds like a weighty decision, one that will have a lasting impact on both Allen and the families of Abby and Libby.
It is. The sentencing phase is often just as emotional and challenging as the trial itself, as it brings the case to its final resolution and determines the consequences for the convicted individual.
It's a lot to process. And as we await the sentencing, I think it's important to remember that this case isn't just about legal proceedings and forensic evidence. It's about 2 young girls whose lives were tragically cut short, a family and community forever scarred, and the enduring search for justice in the face of unimaginable loss.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the twists and turns of the investigation and the legal arguments, but at its core, this is a story about human beings. And it's a story that, unfortunately, raises more questions than it answers.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the initial disappearance to the shocking arrest, the conflicting evidence, and the controversial confessions. We've discussed the impact on the community, the role of the media, and the advancements in forensic technology. But as we wrap up, I'm left with a sense of unease, a feeling that even with the guilty verdict, we may never fully understand the darkness that drove Richard Allen to commit such a horrific act.
That unease is understandable. The lack of a clear motive is particularly unsettling. We may never know for sure what triggered such violence, what led a seemingly ordinary man down such a dark path.
And that's what makes this case so haunting. It's a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, that even in a seemingly idyllic small town, darkness can find a foothold.
It's a sobering thought, and it underscores the importance of vigilance, of community awareness, and of supporting law enforcement in their efforts to protect the innocent and bring perpetrators to justice.
But it also raises questions about the limits of our understanding, about the complexities of human nature, and about the elusive nature of truth. Even with a conviction, we're left with lingering doubts, unanswered questions, and a sense that some mysteries may never be fully resolved.
The Delphi Murders case is a stark reminder that the pursuit of justice is often a long and arduous journey, one that doesn't always lead to clear-cut answers or a sense of complete closure. It's a case that will continue to be discussed, debated, and analyzed for years to come.
And it's a case that serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in a world of technological advancements and forensic breakthroughs, some truths may remain forever elusive, hidden in the shadows of human complexity and the depths of the unknown.
I find myself thinking about Libby German's quick thinking. In recording that video and audio, she was so young, yet in those terrifying moments, she did something that ultimately helped bring her killer to justice. It's a testament to her courage and presence of mind.
It's an incredible act of bravery, and it underscores the importance of empowering young people to be aware of their surroundings, to trust their instincts, and to take action if they sense danger. Libby's legacy will live on, not just in the pursuit of justice, but in the ongoing efforts to educate and protect future generations.
Her story is both heartbreaking and inspiring, and it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there can be glimmers of hope, moments of resilience, and acts of courage that shine a light on the best of humanity.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the Delphi murders. We've explored the evidence, analyzed the arguments, and attempted to make sense of a senseless tragedy. But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring this case, to research the evidence, to listen to the various perspectives, and form your own conclusions. What stands out to you about this case? What questions linger in your mind? Share your thoughts in the comments section below.
And if you found this deep dive into the Delphi Murders case informative, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more insightful explorations of true crime, mysteries, and the complexities of the human experience. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking questions.